All right, let's get right into it. When we talk about business strategy, our minds usually go to these bold, ambitious visions, right? We picture those hockey stick growth charts and just this overwhelming sense of optimism. But what if that very optimism is the most dangerous part of the whole plan? Today, we're going to unpack a framework that totally flips that idea on its head. It argues that a truly durable strategy isn't about shooting for the moon, it's about deeply understanding the powerful, unseen forces that are constantly pulling you back down to earth.
And this quote, wow, it just nails the core of the problem, doesn't it? Think about it. So many strategy sessions, they're not really about finding the truth, they're about building consensus and making everyone feel confident. It's easy to sell optimism. It feels good to hear. But those tough, uncomfortable questions about why a plan might actually fail, those usually get swept under the rug. It feels great in the moment, but it ignores how the world really works.
And this leads us straight into something we can call the optimism trap. It's this huge and honestly often completely ignored gap between the beautiful plan we write down on a slide deck and the messy, complicated reality we have to execute it in.
Just look at the contrast here. It's pretty stark. On one side, you have the strategic plan, just full of confidence, talking all about momentum and upside. But then you look at the other side, the actual empirical record, the hard data, and it tells a very different story. Sky-high failure rates, chronic underperformance, and companies just stagnating, all while holding on to these incredibly optimistic plans. So what on earth is going wrong?
Here's the most important takeaway. This isn't because people aren't smart enough or because they're not working hard enough. Not at all. The failure is actually built into the system. It's baked right into a process that is designed to avoid uncomfortable truths. It just doesn't force a real, honest confrontation with the constraints and pressures that are always pushing back on the business.
Okay, so if blind optimism is the trap, how do you get out of it? Well, this brings us to a really powerful concept called strategic gravity. Think of it as a framework designed to replace all that feel-good planning with a tough, evidence-based look at the forces that are truly in control of a company's future.
Let's break that down, because it's a big idea. Strategic gravity is basically the combined pull of everything you can't just wish away. We're talking about the market you're in, your company's deep-rooted culture, the real burden of regulations, and the actual limits on your money. All these things together create this powerful current that's pulling your company toward what you could call a default future. So your 5-year plan might say you're headed for Mars, but gravity is pulling you somewhere else entirely. And this right here is a massive mindset shift. Strategy is no longer about some heroic battle against impossible odds, trying to defy gravity. Instead, it becomes a discipline of navigation. The new goal is to understand these forces, to respect their immense power, and then, and only then, to make really clear, disciplined choices about where you can realistically go and how you're going to get there.
So you might be thinking, okay, gravity is a cool metaphor, but how do you make it real? Well, you map it. You actually break it down and quantify the individual components that are creating that powerful pull on your business.
This framework maps 4 of these core forces. First, you've got macroeconomic pressure, and we're not just talking headlines. This is about your specific sensitivity to interest rates or supply chain weak points. Second, competitive positioning, a brutally honest look at your real market power, not just the brand you think you have. Third is regulatory drag, which actually measures the compounding cost and headache of all the rules you have to follow. And finally, capital constraints. What are the hard limits of your balance sheet? And notice, something like AI isn't a force of its own, it's a factor within these bigger forces. It's a tool, not a magic wand that makes gravity disappear.
And this is absolutely crucial. These 4 forces aren't just separate items on a to-do list. They are an interconnected system. Think about it. Regulatory drag slows you down, which makes your competitive position weaker, which in turn makes you way more vulnerable to a macroeconomic shock. It's the cumulative, combined effect of all these things that creates the powerful and often invisible pull of strategic gravity.
Now we get to maybe the most important consequence of ignoring all this. We tend to think that doing nothing, just waiting things out, is the safest option, the prudent choice. But when you're dealing with strategic gravity, doing nothing is actually one of the riskiest, most dangerous decisions you can possibly make.
I mean, this quote is just devastatingly true. We tell ourselves we're being careful, just waiting for more data. But what's really happening is we're just letting those gravitational forces pull us, day by day, toward that default future of decline. It feels so responsible in the meeting, but it's quietly cementing long-term failure. So let's just ask the question directly. What are the real, tangible dangers of just letting the business drift? Because it's not just about missing out on some cool new opportunity. It's about a slow, structural rot that happens right under our noses.
So the danger really shows up in three key ways. First, your structural costs, things like compliance and overhead, they just keep compounding, often growing way faster than your revenue. Second, your ability to make a decision, any decision, slows to a crawl. Why? Because ambiguity creates paralysis. And third, and this one is a killer, your best people see the drift. They lose faith, and they either mentally check out or they just leave. It's a true vicious cycle.
To make this painfully real, look at this number. This is an actual cost-to-income ratio from a financial institution, 74%. That means for every dollar they make, 74 cents is already gone just to keep the lights on. That is what happens when you let those structural costs compound, unchecked, year after year. There's no room left for mistakes, for investment, for anything. That is the real price of doing nothing.
Okay, so you've mapped your strategic gravity, you get the huge risk of inaction, now what? Well, the entire point of this framework is to lead you to this final, critical step, the forced decision. It's all about turning that brutal, clear-eyed assessment into disciplined action.
You see, the goal here isn't to produce another fancy report that's just going to sit on a shelf and collect dust. The goal is to force a choice. Once the data makes your default trajectory clear, the decision you need to make, no matter how hard it is, becomes obvious, explicit, and defensible. It's something the entire leadership team can actually get behind.
And this is what that path looks like. You start with that totally unvarnished, honest assessment of reality. That naturally leads you to identify the specific, high-stakes decisions that have to be made. Then, and this is so important, before you do anything, you set explicit boundaries. You decide what you won't do, and you define clear kill criteria for pulling the plug. Only then do you start executing small, contained actions that you can actually reverse if they don't pan out.
At the end of the day, this whole approach really redefines what success even means. It's not about big, heroic, bet-the-company transformations. The real goal is to build a durable, resilient organization that can survive and maybe even thrive under the constant, compounding pressures of the real world. It's about survivability, not just growth at all costs.
So, what's the one big thing to take away from all this? Maybe it's that we spend way too much of our time trying to predict the future. You know, like we're amateur weather forecasters. A much better strategy might be to just stop guessing and instead develop a deep, profound respect for the fundamental, unchangeable forces that are already shaping our reality today. It's definitely not as exciting as a moonshot, but it's a whole lot more likely to keep you from crashing and burning.